But to this now, the DA leader, John Steenhuisen, says the party will invoke Section 19 of the Statement of Intent within the Government of National Unity. The move comes as tensions rise between GNU partners after President Cyril Ramaphosa signed the Expropriation Bill into law. Steenhuisen is accusing the ANC of undermining the spirit of negotiation. He was speaking during a briefing on the party's reaction to the latest legislation.
Clause 19 was specifically put in place to deal with situations where disagreements within the coalition arose. Clause 19 codifies the procedure to be followed when differences arise between parties to the Government of National Unity. Clause 19.3 states, and I quote, "Sufficient consensus exists when parties to the GNU representing 60% of seats in the National Assembly agree," unquote. The only parties that represent 60% of the seats in the National Assembly are the African National Congress and the Democratic Alliance. In the event of a lack of sufficient consensus, the Statement of Intent in Clause 20 continues, the parties to the GNU shall also establish dispute resolution or deadlock breaking mechanisms in instances where sufficient consensus is not reached.
Let's get some more political analysis on this story. I'm joined now by Professor Bheki Mngomezulu, who's the director at the Center for Non-Racialism and Democracy. A very good evening to you, Prof. Well, you heard the leader of the DA there this afternoon, as well as the Minister of Public Works, Dean McPherson. They clearly are unhappy, to put it mildly, about this bill that has been signed into law, the Expropriation Act. What did you make of what John Steenhuisen had to say? He said, look, this is not an ultimatum, but it's a serious call for a reset within the GNU.
Thank you very much for having me, Masa. Maybe let me begin by sending word of condolence to the bereaved families following the passing of our soldiers, as you just indicated at the beginning. And then in the same token, also send our condolences to the President as the Commander-in-Chief of our armed forces. May their souls rest in peace. They died fighting for the country, basically making us proud. On this one, I think, my sister, as a point of departure, there is a turf war between the ANC and the DA. And at one point, I made a statement that I get a sense that both parties don't seem to understand how to manage a coalition government, not a GNU, because we don't have a GNU. But how do they manage a coalition government? On the one hand, facts tell us that the ANC has the highest number of votes with their 40.18% that they obtained during the election last year. But of course, they fell short of the required 50+1 threshold. Similarly, the DA came second and then the MK came third. So none of these parties could run the country on its own. Therefore, they had to reach an agreement as to how they're going to govern South Africa in the 7th administration. And for some time, the DA has been under the illusion that it's a grand coalition. A grand coalition is a coalition of they hold divergent views in terms of policy positions. In this case, if we had a grand coalition, it would have been the DA and the ANC, but that is not the case. Instead, we have a multi-party coalition, which is including all the 10 political parties. Now, on this one, what Steenhuisen is saying basically is not factually incorrect. He is citing specific clauses in the Statement of Intent, which led to us having a coalition government. Now, the problem here is that on both sides, like I said at the beginning, that is a turf war. You would have heard that the President on many occasions indicated that this coalition government has one responsibility, and that responsibility is to make sure that the NDR, that is aligned with the ANC, is implemented. In other words, this democratic coalition, this democratic the National Democratic Revolution that they came up with is implemented. The DA, on the other hand, is saying that, by the way, the president runs the country at the behest of the DA. They are not saying at the behest of the coalition party. They are saying he runs the country at the behest of the DA. So already we have a problem there.
Yeah.
Because then it means that the National Democratic Revolution, on the one hand with the ANC, and then the DA on the other hand saying that in a way you are holding the president hostage.
And speaking of the NDR as well, and the turf war that you speak of too, to quote the DA leader's statement there, he had said just today, President Ramaphosa opened the ANC Lekgotla, saying the GNU exists to implement the NDR. And he was emphatic to say that the DA is not in government to implement the NDR, and the DA is not in government as a continuation of the 6th administration. Now, earlier, Prof, you were speaking about how the two parties actually don't understand how to be in a coalition together. The DA is accusing the ANC of not understanding what happened on the May general elections, that they actually lost power and they have to be able to collaborate and work with other parties, and they cannot continue as if they are the governing party. They are saying that the ANC is just continuing as if they actually won, and they're implementing their policies and without even checking with their GNU partners as well.
That is absolutely correct. That is why I'm saying that for this coalition government to last for 5 years, you need political maturity on both sides. For as long as each party wants to demonstrate to the nation how powerful that party is, they are both missing the point. If, for example, we take the ANC as the leader of this coalition, they must be the ones who must show maturity first. How should they do that? Starting with the president. Whenever he's talking to any person, be it a South African, be it an African in general, be it an international partner, they must give the impression that we went to the election on an ANC ticket, and there are certain things we had promised to the electorate and to the people of South Africa. Unfortunately, we did not emerge victorious. That is a fact. Similarly, the DA had its own intentions, its own manifesto, which it sold to the electorate. Unfortunately, they also did not get the outright majority. Therefore, in a coalition government, it's a give and take. We have to have some compromises, make some compromises, and the tone that is used by the leader of the ANC and the leader of the DA must be such that they both understand this is a coalition government. It's not a DA government, it's not an ANC government, but it's a coalition government. Therefore, the point about implementing this National Democratic Revolution clauses will fall by the wayside. It has to be negotiated. The ANC will say, with 4 objectives, we are happy to forfeit 2, but we are not going to hold back on the other 2. Then the DA will do the same. Other coalition partners will do the same. The fact that you have parties that only have 1 seat in parliament is neither here nor there, because they also have a say in what government does, not necessarily these 2 political parties, because as I said, this is not a grand coalition, but it's a multi-party coalition.
And quickly on that, the DA says they found out about this Expropriation Act being signed on social media. They found out with ordinary South Africans like the rest of us, as opposed to, you know, being a part of those negotiations. What does that speak to when it comes to the balances of power within this relationship?
Okay, let's clear 2 things, my sister. First of all, the Constitution, Section 84 of the Constitution, empowers any sitting president to take certain decisions. If we have a problem with it, then we must go back and do either a constitutional amendment or a constitutional review. But as things stand, the president has the powers to enact bills into law, after, of course, all due processes have been followed. That is one point. But then secondly, given the nature of our government being a coalition government, it means that the president cannot take a unilateral decision. He has to consult his other partners, coalition partners, until they reach consensus. There is something in the ANC which they say is democratic centralism. What normally happens is you debate issues behind closed doors, but when you go out in public, you speak in one voice. The same should apply in this coalition. They can have their differences behind closed doors. We are not as a nation interested in how they argue, who can argue better than the other. That is not our business. In fact, it doesn't concern us at all. All we want is what these coalition partners have agreed to, and then they must implement those agreements in the interest of the country, not in the interest of the DA, not in the interest of the ANC, not any of the coalition partners, but in the interest of the country. That's all we're interested in.
Prof, I also want to just take us back to our breaking news story to just get more insight from you too. You began by also rightfully paying your respects and condolences to the 9 SANDF members who've been killed in the DRC. When you look at the missions that are going on in Congo, and that this is not the first time that we have our own dying there, just also in 2024, last year in July, a South African soldier was killed in a hand grenade, by a hand grenade there. What do we make of, you know, what's going on there now and seeing more families having to get devastating news about these soldiers who fought so valiantly?
Yeah, this is a tragedy, my sister. It's a sad story. Unfortunately, there is no other way around it because South Africa is part of the collective. You recall that in 2013, we also lost soldiers in the Central African Republic, and they were not there by mistake. Similarly, this time around, they are not in the DRC by mistake because the M23 rebels have been giving the DRC government a hard time. And there have been accusations between the DRC government and Rwanda as to whether Rwanda is in fact supporting the M23, which started causing havoc in Uganda, by the way, before finding their way into the DRC. So therefore, as much as this thing is bad, it's terrible, it's a tragedy, but unfortunately, that is the nature of being a soldier. If you're a soldier, I normally say there are two options. You either kill or you get killed. Of course, they didn't go there with an intention to kill. They went there in order to maintain peace and make sure that they capacitate and assist the soldiers from the DRC, which is the correct thing to do in the SADC context, in the AU context, and also in terms of multilateralism, because we are part of the collective. So it's one of those sad realities. Now that we have lost so many of our soldiers, that does not necessarily mean that we must pull out, because there will come a time when we will also need the support of other countries, and that is exactly what is going to happen. So it's a tragedy, but unfortunately, I don't think there is anything else we can do but to keep on assisting our fellow our African countries and the globe under the UN.
Yeah, an assistance that's really needed indeed, also considering that the UN forces were leaving the DRC too. Thank you so much, Prof, for your insights and your time.